Thanks so much for making the time to join us this evening, this afternoon, where, depending on where you are. My name is Michael. I'm the events coordinator and publicist of Annie Bloom's books. For those of you who aren't familiar with the store, we're located in Portland, Oregon, in the heart of Multnomah Village. We've been around for 42 years now, and we are still going strong. Our store is now open to in-store shopping. Woo! Masks are still required. We're open on weekdays from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and weekends 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Our website is always open. You can shop at annieblooms.com day and night. We offer curbside pickup, in-store pickup now, local delivery within 3 miles, and a couple of different shipping options. Let me tell you about a couple of events we have coming up. Actually, later tonight, in a couple of hours, we have authors Joshua Henkin for his new novel, Morningside Heights, and Tom Barbash for Dakota Winters. They'll be in conversation. On Tuesday, June 22nd, 7 p.m., Oregon author William Ritter will be reading from his new middle grade novel, The Oddmeyer Book 3, Deepest, Darkest. And we have a little break until middle of July when we have a couple of good events. Dana Spiata on Monday, July 12th, her new novel is Wayward. And the next night, Oregon author Kelly Williams Brown, she wrote Adulting. She'll be reading from her new book, Easy Crafts for the Insane, a mostly funny memoir of mental illness and making things. Such a good title. Tonight, we are delighted to be hosting Megan Galbraith, author of The Guild of the Infant Saviour, an adopted child's memory book. She's going to be in conversation with Portland's very own Liz Prato, whose latest book is Volcanoes, Palm Trees, and Privilege, Essays on Hawaii. After the reading and conversation, let's admit everyone else here. Welcome newcomers. Sorry to keep you in the waiting room there while I'm reading the introduction. Thanks for joining us. Just saying that there's going to be a conversation and then a Q&A session at the end after that. So get your questions ready while you're listening. Let me tell you about the Guild of the Infant Saviour. Shortly before Roe v. Wade legalized abortion, adoptee Megan, sorry, actually I don't pronounce your middle name, Culhane Galbraith was born in a Catholic charity hospital in New York City to a teenage resident of the Guild of the Infant Saviour, a home for unwed mothers. Decades later, on the eve of becoming a mother herself, she would travel to the former Guild site, to her birth mother's home in Scotland, and to Cornell University, where she discovered the startling history of its domestic economics program. There, from 1919 to 1969, co-eds applied scientific principles to domesticity as they collectively mothered a rotating cast of babies awaiting adoption. The babies shared the last name Damacon and provided the inspiration for Galbraith's art project, The Dollhouse. The Guild of the Infant Saviour is a dizzyingly inventive hybrid memoir of one adoptee's quest for her path. Let me tell you about Megan. She is a writer, visual artist, and adoptee. Her work was a notable mention in Best American Essays 2017 and has been nominated for 2 Pushcart Prizes and has been published in Tupelo Quarterly, Redivider, Catapult, Hobart, Longreads, and Hotel America, among others. She is Associative Director and graduate of the Bennington Writers Seminar, as well as the founding director of the Governor's Institute of Vermont Young Writers Institute. Now, let me tell you about Liz Prato's Volcanoes, Palm Trees, and Privilege. Combines lyricism, research, and humor to explore her role as a white tourist in a seemingly paradisiacal, I don't pronounce that word. Paradisiacal land that has been largely formed and destroyed by white outsiders. Hawaiian history, pop culture, and contemporary affairs are masterfully woven with her personal narratives of loss and survival and linked essays, offering unique insight into how the touristic ideal of Hawaii came to be and what Hawaii is at its core. Liz Prato is an adult adoptee who was relinquished at birth. She did not see her birth certificate for another 49 years and had an unsuccessful and painful attempt at reuniting with her biological family. Liz's most recent work, Volcanoes, Palm Trees, and Privilege, was a 2019 New York Times top summer read and a finalist for the Oregon Book Award. She's also the author of Babies on Fire Stories and editor of The Night, the Rain, and the River on Forest Avenue Press. She's editor-at-large there and has a new essay collection about Gen X forthcoming from SFWP in June 2022. Everyone, please welcome Megan and Liz.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for hosting us. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Michael, and Annie Bloom's books especially. I wish we could be in Portland, actually. And Liz was asking me why I was in a turtleneck because here in New York, it's actually cold. And also I was really lazy. So this is the first thing I threw on. Tonight, I'm going to read a very short section of a piece. It's called Hold Me Like a Baby. And it's kind of the bridge piece to the front of the book and the back of the book. And this is where I talk about the Domicon babies. And they're of particular interest to me. And I think I'm going to write about them a lot more because they deserve a lot more attention. So I'll read you a little bit and then I'll show you some photos from the book. I'll do it the old fashioned way by holding the book up to the screen because we practiced before and it turns out I'm not very good at screen sharing. So this is Hold Me Like a Baby. Their names were Dickie, 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 and Donnie. There was Bobby, Bobby 2, Bobby 3, Grace, Edna Mae, and Joan. They were also called apartment babies or practice babies, and they shared a last name, Domicon, short for domestic economics. Plucked from local orphanages and asylums, hundreds of these babies were chosen to help college co-eds apprentice for motherhood. In 1919, Cornell pioneered the first scientific degree granting program in the country for women called domestic economics. Its aim was to apply scientific principles to domestic tasks called mothercraft, such as making meals, cleaning and ironing, household budgeting, and raising children. Female co-eds, 5 and 6 at a time, lived together in homemaking apartments and collectively mothered the practice babies. Ranging in age from a few weeks to a few months old, babies were loaned to the college for a year. The contracts between the orphanages and Cornell stated that the babies could be returned at any time if there was dissatisfaction on the part of the college. Their birth names and identities were erased, and they were fatted and raised by a rotating lineup of up to 6 practice mothers at a time. The co-ed's work was divided into parts, including the job of mother and assistant mother. Domicon babies were highly sought after for adoption. Adoptive parents were convinced that because the babies were being raised in ideal conditions and by scientific methods, it would ensure a smooth family transition. A 1923 newspaper article titled "Co-eds at Cornell Mother Real Live Practice Babies" referred to the babies as super children. The program ran through 1954. Nearly 120 children were raised in this manner and adopted. Dickie Domicon was the first. Most grew up with no knowledge of having been abandoned or surrendered, or even having been a Domicon baby. All identifying records were destroyed. 3 stories underground in Cornell University's Olin Library is the Division of Rare and Manuscript Collections. The bright finishes, skylights, white paint, and a soaring atrium are the opposite of dark and musty, as I've come to think of an archive. The surroundings seem counterintuitive to the trip I'm going to take back in time. Gaining access to the Domicon records was easy, and the process felt oddly sanitized. I wondered how many others had inquired about the program in general, and the babies specifically. As an adoptee, I know the feeling of wanting someone to come look for me. I also know that being found can feel like opening Pandora's box. I'd come to Ithaca on a month-long writing fellowship at the Saltonstall Foundation. It was the first time I'd had the luxury of time to spend with my art, away from the stresses of everyday life. It was solitude I was not used to. I'd become frustrated with my writing and myself. I complained to a mentor that the hard work of writing about traumatic subjects felt like I was sitting in my own poopy diaper. That's exactly how it's supposed to feel, she said. Back at the reading table in the archive, I watched as a staff person carried in a stack of 4 boxes. Inside were carefully labeled folders with photos, ephemera, and student papers printed on dot matrix printers. There were also various pamphlets and civic duty bulletins. I spent days pawing through the material. It seemed the focus was on programmatic aspects of the degree and its pioneering feminist leaders, Martha Van Rensselaer and Flora Rose, rather than on the babies, who seemed to have been treated like interchangeable lab specimens and less like tiny humans. All that remained of the Domicon practice babies were a few dozen photographs. Black and white photos showed college co-eds vacuuming, preparing baby bottles, diapering babies, and generally practicing at motherhood. In the photographs taken of the babies themselves, they were chubby and exuberant, others emaciated and sickly. All of them were posed, propped up, and no doubt encouraged to smile. It seemed to be the commodification and idealization of what a real child should be, plump and happy, a confident blank slate. I took as many photographs as I could and returned to my studio, where I recreated the scenes in the 60s era dollhouse I'd brought with me. I'd found more fragile plastic baby dolls at a local junk shop and used them as stand-ins for the practice babies. I realized later I was conducting my own experiments. I was playing with the concepts of home and family. My baby dolls were the objects of play, but the Domicon babies were the real experiments, human objects. Recreating their photographs in the dollhouse made the practice of practice babies seem dystopian. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. I just find this whole Domicon program to be, well, dystopian. It's just so incredibly bizarre. The first time you posted about it on Twitter, I was just like, what in the actual hell? They actually just used babies as props, and like they're just objects to them. And I just still can't get over how completely weird that is. You know, and one of the first things you said in that essay was that in that program, there was a line in the contract, which was that the babies could be returned at any time if there was dissatisfaction on part of the college. And part of my story is that I was in the hospital and then in an orphanage for about 10 weeks before I was taken home by my adoptive parents. And I don't think they knew about me. It's not like, you know, they had like, oh, that baby is going to be yours, and they waited 10 weeks. It was just like, hey, now we have a baby, which I think was similar to what happened with you. But anyway, so my adoptive parents brought me home, and on the first night they had me home, their pediatrician called and said that he'd seen my medical records, and unbeknownst to my parents, I had been born blue and deprived oxygen at birth. And the pediatrician said there was a possibility I could have some kind of developmental damage as a result of that. And if my parents wanted to, they could return me. And then you, which I always found so bizarre, again, like I was a toaster or something. And if you just keep the receipt, you can return it, you know, not like I wasn't being treated like a human being. And you said later on in this same essay that your mom had always said to you that she just wanted everything to be perfect. And instead of reassuring you, though, you had this sense of, but if you're not perfect, she's going to return you. So I'd really like you to talk a little bit more about, from an adoptee's perspective, how that feeling, that fear sat in you as a child, and also how it affected your teen and adult relationships.
Wow, those are great questions. And I think it goes right to like the wound of adoption, which is that primal wound, you know, of abandonment. And I mean, until I was an adult, I never had even really heard of that. And so making hay of that as a child, you know, nobody explains these things to you, because I don't think back in the 60s, you know, my parents understood any sort of adoption trauma. So like when my mom would say, I just want everything to be perfect. And there was some part of me that was like, you know, she wants that for her. She wants us to have this perfect life. But for me, the way I was wired, you know, you take that in. I don't know if it was just the way I was wired or because I was adopted also. I just had this feeling like, well, what if I'm not? And compounded with all the things that we have that are a really deep internal life as adoptees. Like for myself, I'd lived a lot in my head. I was pretty solitary as a kid. I had a lot of friends, but I was really, you know, my inner life, it was deep, deep inner life. And I didn't share a lot of things with people. And I took things out on myself, you know, as we do. So I write in the book about, you know, an eating disorder and suicidal ideation and all these things that until I was an adult and found this adoptee community, I did not know were common with us, you know. And had I known that, or had anybody asked me like in therapy at you know, Penn State in group therapy, like, oh, you know, what's your background, I would have told them. So, you know, it definitely wasn't my mom, I think, putting pressure on me. She also said to me, like, just be yourself. And that's kind of a theme throughout the book, is like, but as a kid, you're like, well, as an adopted kid, you know, you're like, who am I? Who am I really? Like, I don't know how to be myself because I don't know really who I am. I mean, I was a white baby adopted into a white family, but I still didn't look like my parents technically. I still couldn't see myself in their faces, you know. Even now that I know my birth mother, and I know I'm Hungarian, and I was, you know, adopted into an Irish Polish family, and I can pass for Irish. I guess I can pass for, you know, but knowing I'm Hungarian now, I have such a sense that like I cannot wait to go to Hungary to like see my people, to see myself, or my bone structure, all of that stuff in another face. And but the perfectionism was something that I think, unbeknownst to my mom, you know, by saying that, I don't think she was asking me necessarily to be perfect, but I think I would put it upon myself to be that way. And that played out in my adult life as being, I was the eldest of two, you know, three daughters. So I was a people pleaser. When my mom died, I filled in for her in sort of that role of the matriarch, which was something at the time I took on proudly and thought I wanted to do. And then you just kind of crumble. I don't know about you, but I crumbled under the weight of it after a long time. And so I don't know, all that stuff. It's really hard. I'm really glad I found this adoptee community. I didn't know about it actually until this book was printed.
Oh,
And
wow.
I really didn't. And had I known, I think, God, what a relief, because I was terrified about what I said in this book. And I remember reading Gabrielle Glazer's American Baby, and she and I have done similar research in parallel, unbeknownst to us. She had researched the Domicon babies, but in another college, because these programs happened all over the country. Cornell was the first, but they were happening all over the country under the guise of feminism. I mean, at the time, this was a very feminist thing. Isn't that hilarious? You look back and you're like, oh,
Oh,
okay,
come on.
right. Let's just get some babies to play with. So it was, I mean, some of the things she said in there through the story that she told about Margaret and her son, just, God, they resonated with me. And I remember reaching out to her and saying, you just validated so much for me, you know. And then through her, I met BK Jackson, and through that, I met like the whole community on Severance. And I was just like, where have you guys been all my life? You know, so.
Well, and people, adoption Twitter is kind of an amazing place because it does validate so many of the feelings. And one of the interesting things about it is people come to their very different stages in their journey as an adult adoptee. So you'll have people who are not angry. You'll have some people that are super angry. You'll have people that have been through reunion, people who can't even get their birth certificate. And, you know, this is one thing that I think a lot of non-adopted people don't realize, is that adopted people are not allowed to see our birth certificates. We were given this kind of fake birth certificate, which was doctored to make it look as if our adoptive parents are actually our biological parents. And there are only 9 states in the United States that have given adult adoptees unsealed or unrestricted access to their birth certificates. And I think the last state to do that was New York, where Megan lives. And when you were writing this book, you were still waiting to get it. I'm wondering, have you gotten it yet?
I have not.
What
No.
the ever?
Yeah. The story is like this. So I think right before, you know, the pandemic, they opened up these records.
Yeah.
So I, you know, dutifully filled out the forms. I sent in like an old lady check, you know, because I just thought that might be like better. I don't even know if they had the online thing set up. And I waited and waited and waited, which is what you do, right? You just wait. And I get this, probably, it felt like 6 months later, I get this all worn out envelope in the mail. And I thought, oh my God, this is my birth certificate. And it was a return check and with a post-it note on it saying, you need to notarize this form in order for us to complete your thing. So I was like, of course, again, I got some information. I have nothing. So I went online and I filled out everything and I submitted it. And all I know is that like they cashed my check, but I haven't seen anything. And I worry somehow that it was like lost in the mail but I just don't know. I was actually rereading your essay, the one you did about your birth certificate in an annotated form. And if anybody's here and hasn't read it, I want to say what it is called.
This is your birth certificate.
It's called This Is Your Birth Certificate by Liz Prato. And I highly recommend it. And there's so many pieces on there that I'm like, oh my God. My birth certificate, my adoptive one, was dated 2 years after I was born.
Yes. Mine was like a year and a half after I was born.
Yeah. And until I started researching this book, there's so many damn clues on that thing. Like they tell you your number up in the top. And I'd learned on like early chat rooms that to find that number and then to go to the registry in the genealogy section in the New York Public Library and try to search, which of course the search is not, as I thought, numerical, because why would that be so easy? It's by, your birth mother's name. So like you just have to like take out these books and think, well, I think I'm Irish. Let's start with the O's. Let's start with the, And it turns out I wasn't any of those nationalities or origins. And but it also, it showed me, the hospital where I was born, which for most people, it's like, oh, I was born in a hospital. But for me, I was like so intensely curious about place, so I went into New York City and I went to see what St. Clair's Hospital looked like. And I researched the place. And I mean, it turns out it's got this fabulous and fascinating history. It's like old St. Vincent's. And before that, it was the charity hospital for like the Guild of the Infant Saviour. They literally put the birth mothers in taxi cabs. They would give them money for the cab ride from the east side to the west side when their water broke. They'd be like, there you go, get yourself over there.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
Oh, wow, that is crazy.
So I'm when I do get my original birth certificate, I'm sort of like, what surprises could this possibly, you just don't know.
You don't know, because there's so many secrets that have been kept from us. And then we also know, now you reunited with your birth mother, Ursula. But you do make mention in the book that memory is not a perfect recording of what actually happened. And there are times in which you wonder if the things she's telling you are the things that actually were. And I certainly have had that same experience with things that I've heard from people about my origins. So I know I'm jumping around a little bit here, but since we've kind of come up on the subject of Ursula, you had just talked about not having your birth certificate and going to the New York Public Library, but you did end up finding your birth mother and meeting her. And I'd really like you to talk about where you are with that now, because I think it's this really profound thing that's happened to you.
Yeah. Yeah. With the publication of this book, I've known her for almost 25 years. And the relationship was, as I look back on some of our correspondence, I think, oh, wow, I kind of really put up with a lot there, because you want to maintain a relationship, right? I used to call her like my bossy big sister. She wasn't really, I don't know, motherly, she wasn't, but also too, that's my expectations, when you, at least for me, I thought, oh, this is going to be like, I'll close the circle and I'll see somebody who has my face and, she'll be motherly and it'll be, all of this. And it's never like that. It's never the fairy tale, which, I now know, of course, but, she's always known that I've been writing this book and because I would ask her incessant questions and she told me she would be my open book. And then she probably never thought I would be published.
Oh, that's nice, dear. You're writing a book.
It's basically what she said. And so, part of the publication process, because I use images in the book, which, I mean, I can show you later, we can talk about the dolls and stuff, but some of these images were, there's a thing you have to go through to get permissions from anybody who has a piece in the book or has given you one of these photos, and so there were 3 of her that I'd wanted to use. One was her graduation from like middle school. One was her in Toronto, Canada, and the other was the one of our reunion. And I didn't hear from her. And I kept reaching out by email saying, I can't do this book without you. I'm so grateful. I'd love to have your permission to use these photos. And turns out she had sent me a certified letter in the mail that never got to me. It was already on its way back, return to sender, that she wouldn't let me use the images unless I let her read and revise the entire book based on kind of her specifications, And so it became, I mean, after the shock of that, after sort of the, all the really bad feelings that I felt from that, sort of a second abandonment, I guess, if you will. I really, it became kind of a challenge from an artistic perspective, like, how do I render this erasure? How do I render this silence? And what I did was took my, a frame that I got from, for my christening, and I put a piece of white flannel in there and I frayed the edges and I put that at the end of, excuse me, at the end of the essay. It was just a blank frame with what looked like a baby blanket in there. And so those stand, and it just says permission not granted. And I think it actually oddly made the narrative stronger. Isn't that sad to say? Because adoption is so much about erasure, about silencing. I think we don't talk enough about how we're silenced as adoptees, even in my own family. My sisters reacted really, really stridently. They aren't even in the book about this, the publication of this book. So I think, the 2 most opposed to me having a voice, sadly, are the people the closest to me in adoption. And now I know, again, from this adoptive community, that that's not a surprise. But boy, before I knew that, it's been really shocking.
And you haven't had any contact with Ursula since then. Did she just ghost you?
Yeah, I mean, I sent her a birthday card. I sent her a Mother's Day card, but I haven't heard from her.
Wow.
I want it to be her decision to get in touch with me, and I'm certainly gonna leave the door open. I want to. There's nothing unkind, in the book. So yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the pictures, because that's a great aspect of this book, is that it's multimedia. It's not just prose, but you use these photographs that you have, and some of them are actual photographs of you as a little person, or your adoptive dad, Michael, and the things that happened, like you said, with trying to use Ursula's pictures. But the thing that's really the kind of the heart of the book is these dolls, and there's the one on the cover right there. And it's interesting because it took me a little bit to understand the link between the creepiness of the dolls. Because you talk, but it really, really, really comes together, because you talk about real babies, how babies are this blank slate waiting to be imprinted. Yeah. You talk about how you were not able to see yourself in your parents' faces, and how that created a void, and how you experienced a sense of invisibility. And then knowing that, and then also with this Domicom program, you really see how that blank stare on the dolls' faces really mirrors that experience of not having anything or anyone to imprint on. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you came to use the dolls and show us some of the pictures.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's funny, the dolls, like the way that this is structured as like a baby book, actually came very late. in the whole process. I'd had images in the book. I'd had like, they were of my like other things that I did in the dollhouse, you know, which is this visual art project that I have. And they were, some of the stuff I was doing before this it was just feminist and snarky. And I was like, oh, well, this could kind of fit in here and this could kind of fit in here. And it just never was working.
Yeah.
And then my friend Walter actually was like, what if you make this, structure this like a baby book? And I thought that meant rearranging essays, but what I landed on was, oh my God, I could restage my baby photos in the dollhouse, just like I did for this DomaCon program. And suddenly it just like all seemed to work. So I'll show you a couple of photos. This is from the front of the essay called Find Me Here. And it's when I'm going to find my birth mother. And it's actually one of my favorites. So there's a little doll on what you'll see is like my nap mat. I had this great nap mat in nursery school. It was like a big giant green foot. So I restaged them this way. You probably can't see it, but it's like my little tiny nap mat.
Oh, look at you.
God, I wish I could be more technologically advanced and share the screen. But then for the DomaCons, the pictures there, this essay did not start out as words. It started as images. And I, at Saltonstall, I began putting these images together as a way of not writing, or as a way of like freeing my brain up so I could write. And so the images, like this one is Dickie DomaCon and his mother. I use a lot of glue dots to like put these babies on there. And this, like when you talk about like sick baby and well baby in that essay, let me show you one of those too, because this was one I remember finding in the archives and going, oh my God. So this baby comes in like this little sickly thing, and then they fat him up and look like this. And so I restaged the same thing in the dollhouse. And I don't, so this DomaCon piece was an installation in an art gallery. And from the artist statement there came the essay, so I think for me, it's really interesting. And this little one looks like my grandson's. Look, this little chubby cutie, right? And then, I mean, the dolls just worked. The dollhouse too. I was like, all right, this is all from the 50s. My dollhouse is from the 50s and 60s. And as I was looking at the archival photos, I was just like, wait, all these props look just like the house. It looks like the practice house.
Yeah.
And it all started coming together. But I think the idea of babies as blank slates is that whole kind of scientific principle, which has been debunked, of course, was really interesting to me. Like the idea that this science is weird, right? There was a science that, you have a baby that's a blank slate and you just give it to someone and it will be fine. It'll be imprinted with anything you say it is. Which is of course not true. I mean, it takes the nature out of, takes the nature straight out of the nurture, right? Mm-hmm. So I was interested in that tension between nature and nurture also. And that's something I tried to explore in the book. But
sorry, go ahead.
No, but the babies, I mean, unbeknownst to me, and the dolls too are like super creepy. Liz was like, do you know the dolls are creepy? I'm like, yes, I do. It's like blank stare,
Yeah.
But, I wasn't, I'm not going to say it was intentional, because what I use what I have at hand, and these dolls were the things that I was playing with at the time. Yeah. So it was, but if you look at any doll has that creepy stare. Any doll is like, even American Girl dolls, they're just same thing. Like you just put a different color hairstyle, different color eyes, mm-hmm. Same face, same structure, but it's supposed to be something different. And that in itself is a little creepy too.
Yeah. And I've never been into dolls. When I was a little kid, I had one doll. And I wasn't, I played with her a little bit, but that act of wanting to mother a baby was never something I wanted. I had tons of stuffed animals though. And you talk in your book a little bit about Bun Bun, which is your stuffed animal from childhood, who you
have
still
him here.
use. Oh, let's see Bun Bun.
I have Bun Bun because we were talking about him earlier. It's my Bun Bun.
Bun Bun. So yeah, I mean, you still use him as a self-calming object.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I still use my stuffed animals as self-calming objects too. And I used to think like, oh God, I'm just really immature. But when reading about that stuff you were talking about those objects and how they're used with children, and you still had one, I started to think, oh, is this something that might be more common in adoptees or people who had to learn how to self-soothe, self-calm, because nobody picked them up when they were crying. There wasn't somebody there to be like, I love you and you belong.
100%. I mean, there's like D.W. Winnicott, who's one of my favorite researchers because he does research on this, talks about these kinds of comfort objects. It could be a blanket, it could be a stuffed animal, it could be anything, but these are essentially stand-ins for the mother. It's that time, like, as a kid, you don't, you except when you're like me and you, like you don't keep your comfort object forever. But, the whole idea of a comfort object is for like when your mother has gone away, you can hold this thing and she's coming back, right? And I think for me, it's like, well, this is a way I can self-soothe because, my mom didn't come back.
Yeah. And you and I both have lost our adoptive mothers as well.
Right.
So we have that additional loss, mother loss on top of all of that.
Yeah.
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 Do we want to, Michael, are you seeing any questions from the audience in the chat that we want to turn to, or should Megan and I just keep babbling at each other?
There are no questions yet in the chat, but people are welcome to post them there, and I'm happy to read them. You'd also be welcome to come on screen, or we can get some more excellent conversation from these two.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd love to see you guys.
Yeah. I'll just say one thing that really struck me is, so you and I, one thing that was an interesting flip in our experiences is I grew up being told that between the time when I was born and adopted, I was taken care of by a foster family. And you thought that you were in an orphanage. Well, it turned out I didn't find this out until like 5 years ago. I was actually in an orphanage, and you found out that you'd actually been in a foster family, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so those are such interesting different perspectives. And I tried to find these pictures earlier today to show to you. I did some research and actually found some pictures in the Denver newspapers that were taken in my orphanage nursery when it wasn't the exact time I was there. There was some picture taken right before I was there and right after. And one of them showed the women who come in and would feed the babies. They had these volunteer women who came in and fed the babies. And they showed this other woman who came in and was like just holding a baby. And there was this other woman who made clothes for them. And so
they're like practice mothers.
Kinda, yeah. And at the same time, I think it somehow probably kept me from being even more fucked up than I am, like and I also tried to find this sheet, my parents got this very, very vague 1-page pink sheet of paper talking about who I was and what my behaviors was. But one of the things they noted is that when I got fussy, I responded and calmed immediately as soon as someone touched me. And I am still like that. That is, I'm sure, why I became a massage therapist. It was part of that same thing. And you have a slightly different experience with touch, don't you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I want to be held. I want to be held. And I've noticed, like, when I noticed this with my girlfriends, right? Because, your girlfriend, especially when I was in grad school, like, you're all sitting around, you're all like, your limbs are on each other, you're hugging each other. And suddenly I was like, why is this weird? This feels weird. Why am I feeling weird about this? Like, this is all I want, I still don't know what that is, but just the, and I'm like, maybe it's because I don't know, maybe, but I just did notice that, like, oh, why am I feeling like that? This is all I want in the world. You know, I want somebody to braid my hair and brush my hair, and
Yeah.
we all like collapse in a pile. I'm not like that as much now, but I really noticed it then. And I was like, well, let's get curious about that. What happened?
Right. Let's get curious. And you
Right.
said your adoptive mother, I mean, she just wasn't, and your family in general, they weren't super physically affectionate, right?
No, not at all. Not at all. Not in a negative, I mean, not like, but I think it was also, it's the 70s and 80s, you know, we were latchkey kids. This is the Gen X portion of the conversation. You know, you're latchkey kids, you come home from school, like I made the dinner, my sisters, we fought, pulled each other's hair. I called my mom crying, and then we would watch General Hospital. And that was like,
So right on, man.
like, that's for your next book.
Right. Yeah.
But there was one particular incident I was telling someone where I remember, you know, I have two, I'm adopted, my middle sister's adopted, and my youngest is the biological child.
Oh, I didn't.
And I remember specifically having an after school fight with my youngest, who had, like, you know, it's in the theme of stupid things to fight about. She'd like thrown dog biscuits on the living room rug, and I was trying to tell her to clean them up. She chased me into the kitchen with a like dinner knife and was trying to stab me, and then like hissed at me, at least I'm the real one.
Ooh.
And so that's like one of those things that, you know, until you remember it, you're like, oh, everything was fine. And then you're like, oh, what happened there? Yeah. So
That's profound. My brother, who I grew up with, he was a year and a half older, and he was adopted as well. So fortunately, we were like, you know, on the same playing field with that concept a little bit more. Although he was brought home like I don't know, 2 weeks after he was born. And so there are pictures of him when he was a baby. And one of the things that you talk about in the book, and one of the things that took me like years, decades to realize is, oh, there's no pictures of me when I was, you know, a newborn. And that is weird.
yeah. I think BK asked, I said something about the antonym for nurture is neglect. Can you talk about that? Yeah. I don't really know what to say about that, because I'm not implying that I was neglected, right? But these kids, these Domicon kids, not having consistent nurturing, I think there are a lot of people who might think, oh, well, they had all this attention, right? They had all these mothers, but unless you have consistent arms to be in, you know, consistency with your mother or your parent figure. Oh yeah, Megan says the object permanence. You don't know what to cling to, right? So it's just like that terrible experiment, you know, Harlow's monkeys, you know, like you're right? Isn't that the worst?
Tell people about it who don't know. I mean, that one just freaked me out. That was so awful.
Yeah, Harry Harlow, and my therapist told me about this. So Harry Harlow was, again, a scientist who did these experiments with baby monkeys, and he gave them two mothers. One was a wire frame of a mother, and the other was a mother with wrapped in terry cloth. It was a wire frame, but wrapped in terry cloth. And he did other experiments also, but I focused on this one in particular. And so when these baby monkeys would get scared, the fact that they had nothing to cling to in the wire mother drove them literally insane. You know, they would throw themselves on the ground. They would, you know, and the monkeys, the baby monkeys that were with the mother that had terry cloth, they had something to cling to at least. So they were less, you know, it wasn't like their real mother who was nurturing them. But I think that's where like the neglect comes from also, you know. I think the idea that, and it's very similar with the Domicon babies or with any people who are in like neglected in orphanages, you know. It's I don't know, it's terrible.
Just hearing that story about the monkeys just gets me all teared up. The part where you say the ones who couldn't cling to anything went insane and they were just screaming and crying. And I just think of how many times in my life I had what seemed like inappropriate or outsized emotional responses to something. Usually things that I deemed unfair, something that hurt me in a specific way. And my dad and my brother would make fun of me, and my mom was, there was always, why is Liz so emotional? Why, all that. And now, okay, I'm starting to understand that, but it's really kind of sad that it took me this many years, and really my own volition to find out why.
I was going to say too, is that there's no one there to help you, to help us make sense of this. Yeah. Nobody in my life at least understood or knew the language of adoption. I didn't know till I was grown, and they still don't. I think from let's say my sister's outsized reactions to me having a voice, there's the whole narrative with adoptees that like, just hush, just keep silent, stay, don't say that like you had a bad anything, and I'm not saying I had a bad anything in this book, but I am talking about my inner life finally. And God, people don't want you to do that.
It's amazing.
Certain people, right?
Yeah.
So.
And I, for sure, my biological father wants to silence me completely. I mean, when this was another weird thing that was a coincidence. You talked about the certified letter that Ursula had sent you. And this is after you'd had a relationship for 25 years, which I just think makes it that much weirder. And anyway, but my biological father had given me, through kind of a similar thing, through a social worker who'd contacted him before, reason to believe that he wanted to have a relationship with me someday. And so when I actually found out his name and contacted him, he was kind of leading me along, saying, well, I'm thinking about how this is going to go and, working it out. And at one point I said, I'm just wondering how you're doing with making a decision, whether or not you've told your kids. They're my brother and sister. I would really like to know them.
Yeah.
And he emailed me back and he said, I should have an answer for you in a couple of days. And what I got was a letter from his attorneys telling me to leave him and his family alone, or he would do whatever is necessary to protect his family. And I got it both as an email and as a
sorry. I'm so sorry. That piece of your essay was the one that struck me the most when you talked about he had to talk to your brother and sister. That's the missing piece. Your brother and sister.
Yeah.
Yeah. And God, when you said that too about the letter, that's almost verbatim what my middle sister, my adopted sister, sent to me. Like, I need to protect my family. I'm like, what? From who? From me? We've been what? Yeah. It's very, it's really, I mean, writing memoir, writing essays is definitely hard enough. And my friend Susan Merrill had said to me, 90% of book publishing is going to be wonderful. She's like, and then there's this 10% that like smacks you upside the head that you never saw coming. And I was like, I think that's 20% for me. But wow. I'm so sorry. That's really awful.
Thanks.
And I mean, we could talk. I think all this goes to like attachment issues, also like how adoptees attach, what our attachment styles are. Like, that's something that I came to very recently. And I talk about a lot in the book, because I did a lot of thinking about that. I read all those books like Attachment and took all the tests. It's sort of like Myers-Briggs, but for adoptees. Like, what attachment style are you? I was like, oh, duh, I'm anxious attached, of course.
Right? Like, I needed to take a test to know mine was anxious attachment.
I know.
Right.
I know. They should have like some sort of Xanax just for adoptees. Like, oh, you're anxiously adopted? Here,
I was the worst girlfriend, especially to my college boyfriend, because I was constantly like, sure, he was going to leave me. He didn't really love me. He was cheating on me. And half these things were true, because of course I'd chosen a guy who couldn't really commit to me. He was someone we should have just like gone out for 6 months and been friends afterwards and everything would be fine. But instead I became this nightmare anxious girlfriend. And you know, I would look back at my journals from that point and I'd be like, I'm not happy. Why am I in this relationship? And yet I was too scared to get out of it. And, you know.
Yeah, it's really, it's so interesting. I mean, this is not just adoptees either, but this is like you really from your trauma, right? You would tend to attract the people that are going to replay that narrative of basically the abandonment. So like for me, I had to like rewire my brain, you know, especially in dating, for example. It's like, I got to rewire my brain or else I'm going to keep attracting, you know, the people are going to just repattern all over again, do the same pattern.
Yeah.
But I think that's really, really interesting. I mean, I'd like actually to write more about that. I think I don't know this, but I don't think we talk about that as so much from like adoptees and dating, you know. I think it's really just very interesting because I think I put the question out there in a Facebook group and some people are just like, I just don't do it. I just don't even
Don't date at all.
I don't, yeah.
Wow. That's intense.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, everybody can make that choice. There was a reading that Annie Blooms did about a week ago with a woman named Donna Ward, who is in her 60s, and she had written a book about the fact that not only did she make a decision to be child-free, but she chose to be partnerless. And some of it was choice and some of it was the way it worked out. And if somebody is happy being partnerless, that's fine. But if it's this fear of abandonment or some kind of psychopathology that's driving it, that's a sadder issue, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I have this great need to just self-examine, you know. I don't know if other adoptees have the same thing, but I think for me that comes from not knowing, you know, my full identity. So therefore, and also as a journalism major, so that's where I get in there and I want to know and I go down the rabbit holes.
I can still relate to that. When I was reading your book, I was like, this is trippy. You and I write in very similar ways around that, like going down the rabbit holes and doing the research. And Is there anybody out there who wants to ask a question or even wants to chime in about your experience? It doesn't necessarily have to be a question. If there's something that's really resonated with you that you want to share, we're totally open to that as well. Or not.
I had a question, but I'm terrified that my internet is going to go out any second. So it's been going in and out. So we have 2 people on Zoom right now. So Megan, I keep thinking about the word savior in your title, and I tried to type this, but I couldn't type it. And I'm just curious, like, if you could speak more about, I know the word has verisimilitude to you know, the factual account of your story, but also to maybe a larger purpose of your need to tell the story and inside of a culture that continues to hold a dominant narrative that adoption is an act of self, you know, it's a savior story. And not always, but that seems to be something that I come across a lot.
Yeah, the whole savior narrative. Yeah, it's interesting that this place was named this way, like it's the actual name of the unwed mother's home. And I also want to write more about the actual home because to the whole idea of that savior complex, right? This was a very blue blood, like society charity. You know, they held, none of this made this into the book, but they held, you know, fundraisers in like the Rainbow Room, you know. So part of me thinks, I mean, they had like all these big like stars of the time were like also doing fundraisers for them. And so part of me thinks, okay, you know, this is where the rich ladies would come to either you know, to have their babies in secret, or it's also where the rich ladies would come to get a baby when they didn't want to ruin their figure and they could get a nice white baby. But I think the savior narrative is such a strong one. Like I think I said before, talking about even how it's affected the people closest to me in print and writing this book. I think that is still in families, in adoptive families, something like they don't even understand that what they're doing is like the savior narrative themselves. Like, you know, you should be good. Like you have us as a family, you should be fine. Why are you writing about this? Why are you acting up? Why are you, you know, instead of being like, oh, you have you have feelings too. That's, so
And you didn't choose this. Like,
exactly.
That's something that gets me a lot. I selfishly ask these questions because I'm not adopted, but I'm really curious about the experience and considering adoption for my family, but in a trauma-informed, open way with lots of therapeutic resources and attachment informed, which happens now, but I think it's still very new in the adoption world.
Yeah. Oh, that's so amazing that the attachment informed. I think that is so important. I mean, now knowing what I know now as an adult, if I had known even what attachment disorder was back as a child, it would have made so much difference in my life,
And I don't hold anything against my parents. They didn't know any better. They were very
Exactly.
bold with this line, and and actually, I think that you and I were like lucky, I guess, in the sense that we always knew we were adopted. So there was no shocking moment of, oh my God, they're not my real parents, and one of the weird things that happened to me early on in adoptee Twitter is I said that my parents had always told me that, I was extra special because they chose me and they went to a lot of work to get me. And I always felt special because of that. And as soon as I said that on adoptee Twitter, I just got slammed for you're in the fog and that's a bunch of bullshit. And I can't believe they peddled that to you. Well, they believed it. And it made me feel better at the time. It wasn't actually something that felt harmful to me at the time. But I think that's a very different thing than what parents are being told right now to talk to their kids about, if they're adopted kids. Yeah.
I'm so happy to see people in here who are like my vintage, I'll say. Who are talking about this, because I think until we find each other, these things, people in the outside world don't understand it necessarily. And so I think it's really important. I've had so many people reach out to me about this book saying, oh my God, it was like you were talking to me, or you're talking from my experience. And to me, I was like, holy cow, I thought I was the only one having these feelings, and writing them down. So it's really, really, it's really amazing and powerful. And I think, my parents did the best job they could. Of course, I'm lucky to have them. They were amazing. I think back, I'm like, oh, they essentially, like, I was in leg braces, they probably didn't know if I was going to limp or whatever. So I was like, oh, they were going to take a chance on me. And the Catholic Charities caseworkers that told me straight out, she's like, if you had limped, she's like, you would have probably been institutionalized for the rest of your life.
That story I told at the beginning about the night that I came home from the adoption agency with my parents, and the pediatrician told them I could be brain damaged and they could return me if they wanted. They hung up the phone and they said, no, this is our baby.
Oh, yeah.
So yes, I felt loved. My parents did a lot of fucked up things. They were not, perfect people by any stretch of the imagination. There was a lot of
their parents, like,
right.
No one's perfect.
Yeah, but you know what? I always felt loved. And that is more than a lot of adopted children end up feeling in their adoptive homes.
Yeah.
And that's heartbreaking to me. Heartbreaking.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I'm so glad to see so many adoptees here, though.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for coming.
Yeah. Michael, you look like you're going to jump in.
I was just going to say, it's about 5:00, so it seems like a nice time to thank everyone for being here, the authors and audience as well. I'm going to post in the chat one more time a link to the event where you can order both of the books from Annie Blooms. We would really appreciate it. Thanks again to everyone for being here. This event's being recorded. I'm going to put it up on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days, so you can let people who weren't able to attend know that, and they can go and watch it at their leisure.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Annie Blooms. Thanks, Liz and Michael. And thank you, everybody who's here. I really appreciate it.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Bye.